Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we're tackling something that I think is really important, and that's recycling. And, well, how to talk about it in English.
Oh, yeah. It's more relevant than ever these days.
It really is, and we're not just going to be throwing vocab words at you.
Yeah.
We're going to equip you with the language skills to actually have real conversations, inspire people to recycle more.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's one thing to, know the words, but it's another to be able to confidently talk about it in a way that'll actually make a difference.
For sure, for sure. And let's be real, this stuff comes up all the time, even just in casual conversations.
No.
I was just at a barbecue with some friends the other day, and guess what we ended up talking about?
What's that?
Recycling. It's everywhere these days, right?
It is. And you know what? It's not just a local thing either. It's a global issue. And being able to talk about it in English means you can be part of that global conversation.
Yeah. Wow, I never thought about it like that. That's actually really cool. So, okay, let's get into it. What are some of the must-know words that we need to have under our belts?
Well, I think the most obvious one is recycle itself. It's like the foundation of everything we're talking about.
Right.
So you could say something like, I try to recycle all of my plastic bottles and aluminum cans.
Okay, easy peasy. But then there's composting, which always kind of throws me off a bit.
Composting. Yeah, it's basically like you're letting your food scraps and yard waste decompose and turn into this super nutrient-rich soil. It's pretty amazing.
So it's like recycling, but for organic stuff.
Exactly. You could say,
yeah.
I just started composting and my garden has never looked better.
So it's good for the planet and good for your plants. That's a win-win. Now, when we talk about recycling, we can't forget about landfills. Right?
Yeah, those are like the giant holes in the ground where all the stuff that doesn't get recycled or composted ends up.
It's kind of a scary thought when you really think about it.
It is, you could say, by recycling, we can help reduce the amount of waste that goes to landfills.
Okay, and then there's this big word that seems to be everywhere these days, sustainability. What exactly does that mean?
Sustainability, it's all about living in a way that doesn't totally mess things up for future generations. It's about using resources responsibly so, we don't run out.
So it's like thinking about the long-term impact of our actions.
Yeah, exactly. You could say sustainability is crucial for protecting our planet for future generations.
I like that a lot. Okay, and then there's single use, which I think is pretty self-explanatory, but maybe you have a good example.
Yeah, single use is all about those things that are designed to be used once and then tossed like plastic straws or those little coffee stirrers.
Oh, or like those plastic water bottles that you buy at the store and then just chuck after one use.
Exactly. You could say, I'm trying to cut down on my use of single-use plastics by carrying a reusable water bottle.
Okay, now this one sounds way more fun than plain old recycling, upcycling. Tell me more about that.
Upcycling is like taking something old and turning it into something new and awesome, giving it a second life, but with a creative twist.
Oh, I love that.
You could say, I upcycled an old t-shirt into a cute tote bag.
See, that's what I'm talking about, turning trash into treasure. Okay, last one for now. What about waste management?
Waste management. That's the whole system for dealing with trash, collecting it, sorting it, recycling it, composting it, and sometimes even landfilling it.
So it's like the big picture of how we handle all our waste.
Exactly. You could say effective waste management is key for a sustainable city.
Wow, we just covered a ton of ground. But don't worry, listener, we're just getting started.
There's so much more to explore when it comes to talking about recycling.
We'll be back in a flash with even more tips and tricks to help you become a recycling conversation superstar.
Stay tuned.
Okay, so we've got the vocab down, but how do we actually use these words, in real conversations?
Well, it's one thing to know the words. It's another to actually use them, right?
Right. How do we actually talk about recycling in a way that, makes sense and sounds natural?
Yeah, that's the key, right? You want to sound natural, not like you're reading from a textbook or something.
Exactly. So what are some tips for, sounding like a natural recycling pro?
Well, first off, be specific.
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, oh, I recycle, try saying something like, I've started separating my food waste for composting, and it's amazing how much less trash I'm throwing out.
Ooh, I like that it's way more descriptive. It's like you're painting a picture.
Right. And another thing is to focus on the positive. Instead of dwelling on all the doom and gloom environmental stuff, talk about the benefits of recycling.
Yeah, like how it helps conserve resources and reduce pollution and all that good stuff.
Exactly. You could say something like, recycling isn't just about getting rid of trash. It's about creating a healthier planet for everyone.
That's so much more inspiring, right?
And don't forget to ask questions.
Yeah.
It shows that you're actually interested in what other people are doing.
Yeah.
and it can spark some really great conversations.
Ooh, yeah, like what?
You could ask something like, what are some of the challenges you faced with recycling? Or do you have any tips for someone who's just starting out?
Those are good ones. And I think it's also helpful to share your own experiences, even the mistakes you've made along the way.
Yeah, totally. It makes you more relatable.
Yeah.
People are more likely to listen to someone who's like, hey, I'm not perfect. I'm still learning too.
For sure, for sure. And it's also important to remember that like recycling rules can be different depending on where you live.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So don't assume that everyone does things the same way you do.
Right. Like what might be recyclable in one city might not be in another.
Exactly. So, always double check those local guidelines.
Okay, so we've talked about like being specific, focusing on the positive, asking questions, sharing experiences. But what about things we should avoid doing, like common mistakes that people make?
Yeah. There are definitely some pitfalls to watch out for, like those little slip-ups that can trip you up, especially when you're trying to speak in a new language.
Okay, so what should we have, like, what are the big no-nos?
Well, one common mistake is trying to overcomplicate things.
Yeah.
Using all this like fancy jargon and super long sentences.
Oh, yeah, I'm totally guilty of that sometimes.
It happens to the best of us, but remember, the goal is to communicate clearly, not to confuse people with your massive vocabulary.
Right. Keep it simple, stupid kiss.
Exactly. And another thing to avoid is being too vague. Instead of just saying recycling is good, try to be more specific, like recycling helps reduce pollution and conserve natural resources.
Oh, that's way better, much more impactful.
And of course, we already mentioned this, but remember to be mindful of those local recycling rules.
Yeah.
What works in one place might not work in another.
Okay, so basically be clear, be specific, and be aware of those local guidelines. Got it.
You got it.
This is great. I'm already feeling more confident about talking about recycling, in a way that like actually makes sense.
That's what we like to hear. You're well on your way to becoming a recycling conversation rock star.
Awesome. But before we get too carried away, I think it's time to put all this knowledge into practice. Like, let's role play some real life scenarios.
I like that. Let's do it.
So imagine you're at a dinner party and the topic of recycling comes up. How do you jump into that conversation?
Ooh, that's a good one. Let's see how you handle it.
Okay, let's do this. Give me a scenario.
All right, so picture this. You're at a dinner party and someone mentions they've started composting.
Oh, okay. I'd probably say something like, wow, that's awesome. I've been wanting to try composting, but I'm not really sure where to start.
Perfect. You've shown interest and you've opened up the conversation for more, details and tips and stuff.
Yeah, and maybe I could even ask them like what kind of system they use or if they have any advice for a newbie.
Exactly. Now let's switch gears. Imagine you're at a community meeting and people are brainstorming ideas to improve recycling in the neighborhood. What would you say?
In that case, I might suggest something like, I've noticed that a lot of people put the wrong stuff in the recycling bins. Maybe we could put up some clearer signs, to help people out.
Nice. You've identified a problem and you've offered a solution that's being proactive.
Okay. I like it. What else you got?
All right, last one. You're chatting with a coworker and they mentioned they're feeling super guilty about all the waste they produce.
Oh, I've totally been there. I could say, I hear you. I used to feel the same way, but one thing that really helped me was switching to reusable containers for my lunch, instead of using plastic bags.
Great example. You've shared a personal experience, offered some practical advice, and emphasized that even small changes can make a difference.
So, we've covered a lot today, but I think the biggest takeaway for me is that, anyone can become a confident recycling communicator.
Right.
It's just about practice and using the right strategies.
Absolutely. You don't need to be an expert or anything. Just be willing to learn and share your own experiences and, ask questions, be curious.
And remember that even the smallest actions can have a big impact. Like choosing to recycle one more bottle or bringing your own reusable bag to the store, it all adds up.
It really does. And, at the end of the day, it's all about taking care of our planet.
Yeah.
Making it a better place for ourselves and for future generations.
Well said. So, listener, we hope this deep dive has given you the tools and confidence to talk about recycling in English.
And to go out there and make a difference.
Thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep recycling, keep learning, and keep those conversations going.